Welcome to those that are attending. We will be starting in about 3 minutes' time. Thank you. Thanks again for those that are still joining. We'll be starting in about 2 minutes' time. Thank you. Anthony, could you respond back to Sanjeev, who's put a message into the chat? Again, welcome and thanks for joining. We'll give it another minute and then we'll make a start. Thank you. Okay, I think we'll make a start. So welcome everyone that's joined on, and it's here. So this is our electrical safety compliance workshop, and the demand for this webinar has totally blown our mind, for want of a better word. I'd say mind and nerves. I think Graham will support me in that. When I say that is never in the history of Scamware we had such a strongly attended webinar before, and I think it's Mark Twain that speaks of there are two kinds of speakers: those that are nervous and those that are liars. So of course there are some that have a unique confidence skills, but anyway, we are a full house today, and to such an extent that unfortunately a number of the registrants have been unable to get on, so a recording will be taken and will be circulated around to all of the attendees and those that registered and were unable to attend. So today's webinar, it was titled as Your Defense, and it's the first workshop of a series that we are running, which are obviously totally non-commercial events, which are focusing on electrical safety compliance. And so we were having a discussion with Graham. Really, the mission of Scamware being saving lives is what can we do to further the awareness around the dangers of working on or near live and potentially live electricity, and what we can all do. We accredit everyone joining this call here today as being, you may say, on the same journey. That is saving lives, protecting people from arc flash or electric shock. So so what are you going to learn today? So we're covering off compliance, the definition, simple terms, duty, and legally. We're going to be looking at incidents, real life incidents, and so Graham, as many of you would already be aware, former EHS director for power conversion globally, GE, and also a particular passion for electrical safety, which he will explain when he moves on to the introductions. But a lot of experience to share, which is priceless, as something that certainly I can't convey. So the incidents, where do we go from here? What went wrong, and what could we have done to stop it? Where do we go from here? Protecting you, protecting your people, and protecting your organization. So protecting your people physically, and then you may say protecting you if you're responsible for people working on or near live or potential electricity, and also protecting your organization from particularly from litigation. And then we are going to look at what the critical components of what a good electrical safety compliance system looks like. And so without further ado, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens, or somewhere on your screen, depending on where you got your toolbar. That Q&A, because this is a bit of a learn and share session, okay? So when somebody puts in a question, I believe the rest of the audience should be able to see the question. And what I would encourage you, because I don't think any of us on this call take any high ground as knowing all there is to know around electrical safety. Certainly not myself. So if you feel that you have the answer to a question that's been raised by, you may say, one of your colleagues on this call, then why not submit the answer? Then we all learn from the questions and the answers. So keep those question and answers coming in, and we'll move through this as quickly as practically possible so we can get on to the answers at the end. So an additional situation is that we are all in, or probably have come out of, a lockdown situation. So I am in a house here with a wife that's nearly lost all of her hair, and a 7-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl. So if you hear screeches in the background or little figures whizzing behind me, then I'm afraid you'll have to excuse me. So I'm Angus Long, an account director here within the Scanware organization. We are an arc and flame clothing and PPE manufacturer and a distribution organization with 7 offices globally. But as I say, this is non-commercial. It's around electrical safety compliance. And I'm now going to hand you over to Mr. Graham Harvey. Welcome, Graham.
Thank you. So let me introduce myself. I'm Graham Harvey. I was the global leader for electrical safety at GE Management. And previously to that, I was the VP of EHS at Converteam. My background, I'm an electrical engineer. I've worked all around the world: Canada, North America, South America, Europe, obviously, South Africa, the Middle East, and in Asia. I've had a passion for electrical safety for a long time, and my boss at the time said to me, "Why don't you take the role?" Which I did. So for the last 30 odd years, I've been designing and implementing electrical management systems, doing a deep dive into audits into electrical systems. And I've also carried out lots of investigations into fatalities, serious accidents, and insurance claims. And as well as that, I've been actually working with insurance companies to help them develop systems for their inspections. I used to be a NFPA 70E tutor. I say used to be because I let it lapse. But I've developed and delivered lots of electrical training courses to employees, contractors, and and loads of others all around the world. So enough about me. So next slide, please, Ben. So this webinar is not about designing or managing an electrical safety system. It's about helping you to assess how compliant with the law your system may be. And that's when it's being judged by others. We all know that fatalities and serious incidents are low frequency but high consequence events. Many of you will never, ever experience one. Others, you may experience one, maybe 2. So today, I'd like to walk you through some of the experiences following a serious accident that I've had. What are the processes, what may be expected of you, and what happens in court, and generally what you may expect from a general point of view if you're ever in this situation. So I really hope you find this thought-provoking. So let's move on. So let's set the scene. Just imagine there's been a serious incident. And again, please, Ben. So what's going to happen? So there's a possibility of multiple investigations. There's going to be a lot of personal stress. You're very likely going to have to go to court. And then, of course, there's what happens afterwards. Next, please. So basically, the players. So who's going to be involved? Who are you likely to encounter? Well, let's start off with possibly the police. And then you've got the enforcement authorities, the accident witnesses, fellow workers, judges, legal professionals, and maybe an expert witness. And finally, you will have to face the family. Next one, please, Ben. So what I like to see is, this is how I actually see electrical appliance. It has 8 main pillars. So we have legislation, we have standards, we have safe systems of work, we have authorization, we have training, we have PPE, accident investigation, and finally, performance. And I'll be coming back to these pillars later in the presentation. Next one, please, Ben. So I thought it was very interesting to see how you rate your electrical compliance at the moment. So please be as honest as possible and imagine that you're in the position of explaining and defending your system to the authorities. So we've got 6 categories. The first one I think is very self-explanatory. I've got no idea. The second one, we have the basics in place. So for argument's sake, you could say, yeah, we've got risk assessments, we've got method statements, and we've got a few other procedures. We're about average. How about saying we've got method statements, risk assessments, basic lotto, permits and authorizations defined. I know where we need to improve. So I've carried out a full review of the legislation. We have a plan. We're nearly there. So you've been into an improvement plan for the last 2 to 3 years, and you're reviewing compliance on, let's say, a yearly basis. And then finally, I'm fully confident, well, that explains it all, doesn't it? Well, 100% bomb-proof. So I want to emphasize, we can't see how you vote. And in a moment, a drop-down box will appear. So please select the appropriate answer to you, and then click the submit button. So here it comes. I'll give you 20 seconds to make your choice. And please remember, we can't see how you voted. Okay, everybody voted. Let's have a look at the results. Well, that's quite interesting. I didn't expect to see a spread like that, but okay. But that's very pleased that everybody's been honest, and it's nice to see we've got the whole spectrum covered. Right, let's move on. So we've all seen these signs, but why do we need to be compliant? One of the biggest things I always used to knock on about was the 50-50 rule. So unless you've never come across it, I'll just say what the 50-50 rule is. So if the circuit voltage is above 50 volts and it's capable of drawing 50 milliamps or more, and the circuit has no current limiting protection, i.e. no GFCI or no RCD, then there is a potential for that circuit to be fatal. So why 50 volts? So the resistance to the skin can vary considerably for voltages below 50 volts, and it usually restricts the current to relatively safe levels. And this is why a lot of the electricity regulatory bodies consider anything below 50 volts as safe. However, the skin's resistance can decrease rapidly for voltages above 50 volts. And therefore the current flows, increases, and it goes through the vital organs such as the life. And this is when it becomes life-threatening. A lot of people have difficulty with this concept, 50 volts can't kill you. Believe me, it can. So personally, I knew an enforcement officer, and he was telling me of a death. And the person involved was working on site. It was a very hot day. He had taken off his shirt and he was sweating. He stopped for a very brief second. He leant back, touched the steel footing, and apparently death was instantaneous. So it does happen. There are recorded cases, so please be aware. Thank you, Ben. I want to do a quick recap about electricity. I think it's very important. I don't usually read the bullet points, but in this case I'm going to. So electricity is invisible, and this makes it dangerous. From my experience, what I found is that because it's invisible, people tend to ignore it, and that's where the danger really creeps in. It has great potential, as we've already discussed, to seriously injure or kill. We all know that every company has a duty of care for its employees and contractors, and everyone is exposed to electrical hazards, not just electricians. And it really is important that we report all electrical shocks and near misses. I spend a lot of time talking to maintenance guys and electricians, and they go, it's just a tickle. It goes with the job. It's part of the territory. It is not, because next time, it could be fatal. And basically, all employees should receive electrical hazard training. I want to tell you a little story about a storeman. You would have thought, okay, stores, working in stores, it's fairly safe. There's no real big hazards there. But I was called to investigate an incident. And what had happened was this storeman had actually got 2 big HV burns in his palm of his hand. And they were serious burns. I mean, we're talking really serious HV burns. And what had happened was he had actually touched an electrolytic capacitor. And for those of you who don't know, electrolytic capacitors have the ability to recharge. So nobody had warned him about this hazard, and nobody had warned him to check that the shorting link should be in place. So again, you need to look all round you need to look at the bigger picture when you're looking at these things. So moving on, Ben. So what's compliance? So according to the English Oxford Dictionary, it's the practice of obeying rules or requests made by people in authority. So next one, Ben. Again, we've already discussed everybody's got a duty to manage those regulatory risks. And again, Ben, and we have to make sure we've got adequate controls in place. So the next one is the interesting one. Responsibility. So if you're one of the following people, make no doubt about it, the responsibility falls clearly and cleanly at your door. So if your name appears at the bottom of a procedure or a policy document, if you're the SAP, if you're in charge of an electrical system, or you're in charge of the health and safety department, then make no mistake about it, it's you. It's you that the authorities will want to interview, and it's you that will have to go to court to explain and justify your electrical compliance. Thank you, Ben. So compliance in a nutshell. So here we go, 8 little points. So I would ask you all, are you aware of all the appropriate legislation in your country? Are you aware of all the appropriate regulations? And are you aware of all the appropriate standards and guidelines? And you may notice I emphasize the word all. From my experience, most companies are not, and they stay blissfully unaware until the authorities or the lawyers say, well, how do you comply with standard XXX? So ideally, you really ought to have a register of all the legislation, standards, regulations that affect your business and employees. And more importantly, you have to have clear and understandable policies and rules for your employees, so they're communicated effectively and they actually understand them. Or do you just have a set of books sitting on the shelf, gathering dust? And again, I would say to you, what are you doing about the guys that are in the field? I'll give you an example. I was asked to investigate an arc flash incident. Young engineer in his early 20s, mechanical guy, so he had absolutely no inkling about electricity at all. He arrived at site, checked in, and to cut a long story short, he was at the wrong end of a arc flash. What happened was his face was pitted with copper splatter, and his eyesight was saved solely because he was wearing spectacles. When we investigated, he'd got a permit to work, and that's exactly what this young engineer thought it was, a permit to work. He didn't understand the system. Nobody explained it to him, and nobody walked through it with him. So when we traced back through his records, his training records, we actually found he hadn't had any site awareness training. He hadn't had any electrical training. He definitely hadn't had any permit training, and he wasn't aware of what Lotto was all about. So I'll let you ponder the outcome of that case. So why is compliance important? Next slide, please, Ben. So let's get back to our accident. So imagine the headlines either on TV or in the newspapers. So the headlines could quite easily be, worker paralysed after suffering an electrical shock for 20 seconds. Employee electrocuted by faulty or unsafe equipment. More emotive, father of 2 young children dies after electrocution. Or it could be, employee suffers life-changing injuries after an electrical explosion. And this next point I can't emphasize enough. The press often speculate about incidents. So whatever you do, do not speak to the press. Don't even say no comment. They want headlines. They want a story. They don't always want the facts. Thank you, Ben. So, once the dominoes start to fall, and believe me, there is nothing in your power that you can do to stop what is about to happen. And it's going to affect you tremendously. So the first big question I would ask you is, have you a procedure in place for these types of events? And I'm not talking about a normal accident procedure. Have you got a procedure that covers major events? Do you actually practice it unannounced? If you don't, how do you know it works? You can't plan these events. I'll give you an example. Several years ago, I was flying back from holiday. I landed at Heathrow Airport, switched on my mobile phone, and instantly had loads of missed calls, messages. An employee was seriously injured after coming into contact with 6.6 kV. Sorry, kV. A ticket was waiting for me at the airline desk, and I packed a bag, and I was quickly gone. But I always made it a rule to always have an accident bag with me. And in the contents of that accident bag was the accident routine, important telephone numbers, a notepad, coloured pens, chalk, a tape measure, a high-density torch, a small roll of boundary tape, a digital camera, a digital voice recorder, and spare batteries. So again, I'd really ask you, are you prepared for such an event? Thank you, Ben. I think there's nothing as sobering as walking into an accident area and seeing a body outline chalked onto the floor. Unless there's been a fatality, you may well have to start the investigation by yourself, because it could be days before the authorities decide what to do. And from my experience, the first time you meet the authorities will be how you judge the investigation will go. I've met investigators who are just downright aggressive and angry. There are those that jump to conclusions, but on the whole, I'd say most are reasonable. But the biggest issue I've always encountered is having to wait for the enforcement authorities to find an electrical expert so they can start their investigation. That doesn't mean you delay yours, it just means they are always 2 or 3 days behind you. So, talking about jumping to conclusions, a little story about the police jumping to conclusions that totally floored the court case. I was asked to investigate a fatality in an Eastern European country. It was supposedly an electrocution. A middle-aged gentleman had fallen off an aluminium ladder whilst working on some iron pipeworks. The police arrived, came, had a look around, and to them it was an open and shut case. The guy had been electrocuted. When I arrived, I spent 3 days trying to find and trace any kind of electrical source, to no avail. I wrote a report, it went to the police, but no action was taken. The decision had already been made and the outcome was sealed. I later found out that the worker, if they died through a work-related accident, then their family got compensation. If they didn't, it was natural causes. Of course, we couldn't actually dispute what the police had said, but it was our strong impression that the guy had actually suffered a heart attack. Anyway, I digress. Lockdown, we're all experiencing it at the moment. Some of us like it and some of us don't. But when you have an incident or an accident, the authorities will actually lock down that area of the incident. And it could be for days, it could be for weeks, or it could be for months. It may affect the production, and it will not be released until the authorities say so. And the longest I've experienced was nearly 5 months. And again, this will add stress to your life, as the management really want the processes up and running again as soon as possible. Thank you, Ben. So let's talk about the legal system. And this is not an exaggeration. Your lawyer will be your new best friend. We live in a world where everybody wants some kind of compensation. One slight slip of your tongue, one poorly written note, and it will come back and bite you really hard. It is just so easy to say or write something down that could be taken another way. So as I mentioned earlier, do not talk to the press, not even no comment. And if you're going to give an interview to anybody, doesn't matter who it is, anybody, if you're going to write anything down, any written evidence, any comments, any reports, they need to be vetted by your lawyer. They are trained to interpret. You are not. The paperwork and records, I can't emphasize the importance of maintaining records following an incident. What you collect and give to the lawyers is really, really important. It may not be important to you at the beginning, but by the time it gets to court, very likely that document file will be 6 to 8 inches thick. So unless you've got a very, very good memory, always keep a log. And I'm always amazed, astounded in fact, that some people just pass records, drawings, equipment without recording what's left the company. And my advice, Bill, would be whatever you submit to the authorities, make a copy for yourself so you know exactly what's gone. In other words, make a duplicate file. And make sure that you take numerous photographs of any confiscated equipment, any tools. It may be the last time you actually see them until you get to the courtroom. When we go around collecting evidence, especially these days, most people have smartphones. You need to get the videos, the photos, any recordings from the local workforce or whoever witnessed the incident. And you ought to check as well that you have some kind of policy in place to deter employees from passing this information to the press or any other sources. Excuse me. Collecting statements is always difficult, but it needs to be done as soon as possible. The longer you leave it and the further you get away from the time zone, the actual time frame when the accident happens, the worse it will get. People talk, they compare notes, they fill in the blanks. I remember taking statements within 30 minutes after one serious accident. We actually discovered there was some CCTV footage. And when we reviewed the footage of the CCTV against the statements people had given, the difference was outstanding. And nobody deliberately lied, but their brains had filled in the gaps. The other thing you have to bear in mind as well, that the injured party's workmates could be in shock. They may not be coherent. But time is important. And if you've never ever done an interview techniques course, I would strongly recommend that it is money well spent. I've always had problems with people changing their statements, especially after weeks or months. And it's something you have to be wary of. You can't stop it.
Graham? Hello, Graham?
Yeah.
Are you back? You just froze for just a few seconds.
Ah. Where did I get to?
You're talking about having training on interviewing, but maybe it was my reception. Sorry.
Right. Okay. Okay. So if you haven't done the interview techniques course, it's something I would say money is well spent. The other problem I have always had is people changing their statements, especially after a few weeks or even months. And it's something you have to be wary of. You can't stop them doing it, but you really do need to warn them about the possible consequences of misleading the court with any type of evidence. And I can remember one person changed his statement 4 times, and each time it was to help the injured party's case. Something to be aware of. Next point, Ben, please. So, you, the all-important you. So what's going to happen to you? You're definitely going to feel stress. I'm pretty sure we all feel it, and it can affect people in different ways, especially if you knew the injured party. I've always found that I was constantly questioning myself, could the procedure have been better? Why didn't the last audit pick this up? Then there's the long hours, the sleep patterns that get affected. They all take their toll. And this coupled with even more interviews with the authorities, the endless reviews internally and double checking facts adds to the pressure. Plus there's the unintentional pressure from your own management to get things solved and get things back to normal. And the one thing that really used to increase my stress levels was when I got requests for obscure records. I always found it extremely worrying, thinking, now where's this line of inquiry going? What have they found? So once all that has been settled, we end up in court. And as I previously mentioned, we live in a world where compensation is the norm. And going to the court in any situation is stressful. But in these types of cases, I find it even more so because they tend to be over a longer time period. So before your appearance in court, you can do all the prep you want. You can run through the files, check the procedures again, review the photographs, refresh your memory, and you think everything's been covered. And I remember taking a witness box once, and after the usual pleasantries, the first question to me was, well, Mr. Harvey, with all your qualifications, with all your knowledge, and with all your experience, surely, Mr. Harvey, you must have known this would have happened. So why did it? I'll be quite honest, I never saw that question coming. It was personal and it was really, really unsettling. And the biggest issue in any situation like this is to be able to stop and think before you answer. It's very easy to blurt an answer out, but you have to stop and think. I then spent the next 2 days being questioned and explaining about all the evidence, our policies, procedures, and records. And I'm going to touch on a few of those questions in a few moments. But the other thing is, if you are really unlucky, the family could have taken out the services of an expert witness who will testify how things could have been better. And yes, there is a better standard out there that the company could have followed. And yes, the training is lacking. It was poor, it was inadequate. So overall, the whole experience is mentally and physically tiring. And then finally, there's the fallout. So whatever the verdict of the case is, it's still not over for you. There'll be lots of ramifications, excuse me, and adjustments to make. And for the next few months, the stress might ease off a little bit. But if you're really unlucky, the enforcement authorities may take an interest and pay you constant visits. Okay, thank you, Ben. So back to the 8 pillars. So this is my view of how I see electrical compliance. So within the 8 pillars, there's multiple subjects. And it really is a no hiding place. For the simple reason, all the pillars are totally interconnected in one form or another. A little pull on one pillar will ring bells around the rest of the pillars. And again, it exposes any weaknesses in your system. So what I would say is, electrical compliance is and can be a very complex subject. And in my humble opinion, if you've not addressed all of these points, then I'm afraid your system may be and will be found to be lacking. So what I'm going to do now is just pick a few points that I've been questioned on in court in the past to give you some food for thought. Thank you, Ben. So legislation. It's not only making sure that you know what legislation affects you. But the key point here is, how are you actually interpreting that legislation? I've been to numerous companies where all they've done is done a copy and paste of great sections of the law and said, here's our procedure. If you, as the person in charge, can't translate that into simple terms for your workforce, how do you expect your workforce to understand it? And more importantly, how are you going to explain that to the authorities, or in the worst case scenario, when you get to court? Thank you, Ben. So I've said before, do you know what standards and regulations affect you? Is there a better standard you could be using? When it comes to electrical safety, I personally think that NFPA 70 is one of the best I've ever come across, but that is a personal view, it's not a fact. So what I would say is, how are you keeping up to date with the revisions? How are you keeping up to date being aware of new standards? And if you're moving people between different countries for jobs, how are you ensuring they comply with all the local regulations? Something that needs to be covered in your system. Thank you, Ben. So, safe systems of work. I'm just going to pick on a couple here. And again, it's because of what's happened to me in the past. So the question I'd ask you is, how do you train and test emergency routines? For example, how do you test a safe high voltage shutdown and a rescue? Do you audit the rescue equipment? The times I've been to sites and I've been told that an insulating manoeuvring stick or a cable pole was the rescue hook. This means not only is your SW failing, but it also means your training system is failing. Do you actually take the time to talk to engineers? And by talking, I don't actually mean doing an audit. I mean sitting down, taking the time out, sitting down with them and discussing over fish and chips, burger and chips, how they feel about the system. It's the only way you can gain trust. And it's the only way you can find out what really happens and fully understand their views. And again, I would say that many safe systems of work, many procedures are written by someone in an office and they're never really tested in situ. So again, I'd ask you, are yours? And we touched on permanent failures earlier, but it's well worth pointing out while we're actually in this system, in this section, that a high proportion of all electrical incidents are caused because of no or poor permitting coupled with poor lotto. And again, I really want to briefly mention earthing. Do you have routines? Are people trained? And do they actually use it? The times I've been to sites and factories and I've actually just found the earth kit just sitting in a corner, still in an open box, because people didn't know what to do with it. Thank you, Ben. So let's have a look at authorizations. So do you have levels of authorizations? Are they meaningful and are they adhered to? And are they reviewed on a regular basis? So a little story here was electrician on site. He was only authorized to work on LV. But he had a bit of spare time, so he thought, I'll tell you what, I'll be helpful and I'll assist the HV guys. Nobody stopped him. So he actually got hold of his multimeter and put it across 3.3 kV. And as expected, the multimeter blew up in his face. He got covered in shrapnel. And the multimeter leads had actually melted into his arms. Why? Because he had apparently had the habit of wrapping these leads around his arms to stop them dangling. He was in hospital for weeks. So if you actually start looking at that, there were systems in place, but they were totally ineffective. Nobody was actually checking that the guys were actually following the real procedures. SAPs, or senior authorized persons, they are the ultimate duty holder for electrical safety. And this is always a hot topic for authorities. They are the controlling mind. They are the person that says, yes, all the paperwork is in place. Yes, the controls are in place. Yes, it's okay and it's safe to work. But I would ask is, how do you select them? These people are different. Yes, they all have the experience, the qualifications, the knowledge. But what makes them different is their attitude towards electrical safety. And these positions are time bound. It's not something you take from one job to another. And it's often tempting for companies to make everyone an SAP. And believe me, in a court of law, this will be judged as not good practice, and your justification very likely be flawed. Thank you, Ben. So, training. I've been involved in lots of cases where the training records have been requested. In some cases, going back 4, 5, 6 years. So you think, oh, why are they going back that far? What they're looking for is trends analysis. Do you have a set time period for actually refreshing the training? Does it include refresher training after an incident? As that person had an incident, did you refresh their training? And again, I've been in court where the judge has made it extremely clear that in his view, according to law, because that's all that they judge it on, that the training should not exceed, or the periods between training should not exceed more than 3 years. And that if a person changes their role, gets promoted, then their training needs to be reviewed and given new training wherever possible. And again, I would say it's on the list there. What do you do about your subcontractors? They're often neglected. Sometimes we do them ourselves and sometimes we don't. We just assume they've been trained. Thank you, Ben. So I'm just going to highlight a couple of things here. So when was the last time you reviewed the job with the clothing? I've been to loads of places and I've said to the guys, oh, where's your PPE? And they've taken me to lockers, little bits on this site up, and they've gone, there you go. And it's a full Cat 4 suit, the whole works, the hood, everything. And it's still in packaging. And you've got to understand why they won't work it, why they won't wear it. I mean, what's happened is that their manager has taken the easy route and said, oh, well, okay, if I give them Cat 4, everybody's covered. It won't stand up in court. And you'll be really severely questioned as why you didn't do the proper routines. So that's one point with the PPE. The other consequence is when you do your audits, do you actually audit the cleanliness of the kit? It's pointless once Fred has burst into a ball of flames because he's covered in grease and oil. We need to make sure everything is okay. And I really just want to mention tools. Do you audit the tools? My pet hate, and it is a hate, is electricians who buy DLIs, that's deadline indicators, from DIY shops. In my opinion, they're dangerous and it's just waiting for an accident to happen. They have limitations. So if you see an electrician or a maintenance guy or anybody else with one of these, you need to ask them, okay, what are the limitations of this piece of equipment before somebody loses a hand? Because believe me, the cheap versions are really bad news. If you buy the proprietary items, there's nothing wrong with them, but it's just these cheapies that have a real problem. Thank you, Ben. So, accident investigation. Accident data, do you really analyse it? Do you look for trends? And again, I'd say when you're looking at this, is where's all the electric shocks? Do you question reports, or do you just accept them coming in? Again, if the unlikely thing happens, this area of your records will come under, without any shadow of a doubt, extreme and close scrutiny. And finally, thank you, Ben, we have performance. Again, audits is also a very sore point with me. Very few people audit the whole of an electrical system. They just do the easy bits, the test areas. So if you're not auditing maintenance of substations, the switchgear, the single line diagrams, you're leaving yourself really, really exposed. So just imagine if you have an arc blast through power overloading. There's lots of companies I know that just add a bit of switchgear here, a bit of switchgear there, and before you know it, the circuit is getting more and more overloaded. And it's too late once it goes pop. So what I'm saying, if you want to do a full audit, electrical compliance audit of say like a medium-sized factory, it should take around about a week. Might seem a long time, but if it's taken a week, you've done a pretty thorough job. And it's not a half a day as most people do. So at that point, I'm going to stop on this. So this is my mind map of electrical compliance. Yes, you could say it's a simplistic view. But if you add the meat to the bones, I feel that this covers everything you should be doing to stay compliant, and you should feel confident that your system will pass any kind of scrutiny. So thank you, Ben. So I thought it'd be a good idea just to run the poll again to see if you've changed your mind. So again, I can't see the answers. So Ben's going to drop the questions now. So if you actually have a look at that, I'll give you 20 seconds again. Okay, so is everybody finished? Thank you. Let's have a look at the results again then, Ben. So we've had a little bit of change, but not a lot. A few more people have gone down. But the interesting point is I know where to improve has also shrunk quite a lot. So thank you for that. That's been really, really interesting. I really hope you found that an interesting exercise. Okay, so thank you very much. Next question, Ben. So where do we go from here? So what I would recommend, and I've always found that if you have an issue with the authorities and you haven't got an active plan that's meaningful, it goes a long way to mitigate your defense. So if you do a full review of your system, we can establish priorities. We can develop some procedures. We can provide some training. We can clarify those priorities again, monitor and correct. So it's all very straightforward, but it will take, I would suggest, quite a long time. So I'm sure you're all thinking, what the hell is that elephant doing there? So it's very simple, I think. Compliance, it's like you can't eat an elephant in one sitting. So improvement takes time. So thanks for listening. I sincerely hope you found it enjoyable and a little bit thought-provoking. So back to Angus.
Thank you, Graham. Really appreciate that. Also conscious that we're running to the buffers on time. So yeah, do think it's been thought-provoking, and I think a number of attendees on this call will probably got an elephant somewhere amongst their trinket stash, courtesy to Graham. I won't call you out, but just to before we move on to Q&A, I think a couple of things that we're noticing, I've learned from Graham as well, is that the authorities, they want to see at least a clear demonstration that you are endeavouring to be compliant, in the sense that trying to be in the utopia of 100% compliance is a as I say, is a target for us to achieve. I think in the current situation we're in with the COVID, is that the worry is cost cutting, cutting corners, removing people from positions of, I want to say, authority, particularly from an auditing perspective, because when organisations are looking at their cost structure, the question is, does electrical safety earn them money? Well, not necessarily, but it could cost them when it goes wrong. But anyway, I'm going to move on to the Q&A session just quickly. I think we've got some questions that have come in here. I'm not too sure whether they'll be able to be answered as comprehensively. Gary, I think you made a point. I think it's important to understand that you can delegate responsibility, but not the accountability.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Good. Another one is, have you got advice in making sure that cases aren't jumped to conclusion, like you mentioned in regards to the police?
The police one was difficult, but what I've always tried to do in the past, when people have jumped to conclusions, when especially senior management, I hate to say it, but they tend to jump to conclusions, is to actually just very politely wind them back in again and say, well, look, we haven't got all the evidence yet. We need to, before we can make a conclusion, we need to find out everything. It could take 2 or 3 days. Management do like quick answers, and that is not always the case. But if you've got an authority making a jump into conclusions, there's very little you can do, as I found out. Good.
And keep on moving. So you mentioned a reference about the NFPA 70E, why you feel from your personal perspective it's the best.
Yeah, I came across that document, I don't know, maybe 8-10 years ago, and I've always found it's very comprehensive. It can be very confusing to read, but it's everything is in one place. It's quite a thick document, and it's not like, say, some of the UK law where it's all over the place. With NFPA 70E, you need one document and you can sort through it. So that is one of the reasons why I like it. You can find things very, very easily.
Very good. So I really am, in respect of time, a couple of things. There's a reference on here around specific standards. One of the reasons why no specific standards, etc., are being discussed in this workshop is that we have attendees from the Asia region on this call here today, and North America, well, from pretty much most regions around the world. Hence the reason being is that we didn't want to begin prescribing or deep diving into any one piece of legislation. But Ben, if you could just move on to the next slide just quickly, because I really want to honour the time frame. So we are deep diving into PPE standards and legislation on the 18th of June. And again, all of these will have subject topic experts in these, or shall I say specialists in these particular fields. July the 9th, accident investigation and performance. July the 30th, authorization and training. They're free to attend. And moving from the next webinar onwards, there will also be CPD certification for UK attendees. And of course, they are free to attend. So I am sorry that we've run to the buffers on time. Really appreciate everyone.
Just quickly, the extra questions that we've got on here, they will be answered individually, and also there will be a comprehensive presentation sent out with a recording, as we mentioned at the beginning.
Very good. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you everyone for attending. Really, really appreciate that, and I trust you found it informative. There will be a brief survey going around after this. Really, really would appreciate your honest, candid feedback. Just spare 30 seconds to complete it, and it will help us to ensure that content is relevant moving forward. As we continue,
the survey should be on the web page browser that they've opened up with the Zoom with.
Very good. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening, morning, and a good day. And thank you, Graham, as well. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks,
folks. Thanks for your time.
Everybody stay safe.
Thank you.
Sounds like somebody's got some. Graham, is that your country residence with the birds cheeping in the background?
No, I think it's birds outside my house. No country.
Your reception is breaking up, Anthony. We'll just wait for the attendants to
house.
Ben, can you mute him? Thank you all that are still on. Have a great day. Keep safe, keep positive, keep smiling, keep happy.